Good evening, I'm Jason Vio. Katarina is away tonight. This is CBC Windsor News. Thank you so much for watching. Tonight, 13 windows downtown smashed, and police say they found the one person they believe is responsible. Plus, Shrove Tuesday, Fat Tuesday, Punchki Day, whatever you call it, we went out to see how this busy donut day went across Windsor, Essex. Earthquakes in our area aren't unheard of. You may not always feel them, but could changing Great Lakes water levels have an impact? And inflation is dropping while the cost of food continues to rise. We'll have all of those details coming up. One culprit is believed to be responsible for 13 smashed windows scattered across the downtown area. Today, police say they've charged a 53-year-old man with mischief. Ward 3 Councillor Ronaldo Agostino says he's been downtown for 35 years, many as a business owner, and he's never seen anything quite like this.
This type of destruction caused by one single person using the same tools over and over again. It was almost like there was a vendetta against small businesses. You know, it's shocking to me that someone would have the wherewithal to even consider doing something like this. I'd like to see him pay for every single broken window. I'd like to see him pick up the glass from when they changed the windows, and I'd like to see him spend some time in prison, you know, because this is just not cool, right? You just don't do that.
All of the broken windows caused more than $12,000 in damage. Now, these incidents happened over the course of 2 months in November and December. Police say the man arrested used metal nuts to break the glass. They say surveillance video helped them link all of the acts of vandalism to the same man. Agostino says aside from this incident, vandalism hasn't been a big problem in downtown recently. But the owner of Fog Lounge disagrees. The bar had its front door spray painted earlier this week, and the owner tells CBC News his windows were broken in recent months, costing about $2,000. Owner Tom Lucier doesn't think the vandalism will end now that someone has been arrested. Lucier says there needs to be more people and supports for people in Windsor dealing with mental health and addiction issues, adding that police can't be expected to be around to prevent acts of vandalism. Punchki Day, more commonly known as Shrove Tuesday, was celebrated across Windsor today with delicious donuts oozing jelly, bringing big smiles to people's faces. The CBC's Jennifer LaGrassa was out and about to see how people were enjoying the busy day.
The hustle and bustle, along with thousands of powdered-filled donuts, can only mean one thing. It's Punchki Day.
By noon, many people were lined up outside of Black's Bakery waiting to grab their favorites.
Hoping for all, but I think there's 2 left, so you better get down here quick. It's Punchki Day and it's Black's Bakery, so let's do it.
Staff and volunteers fired up the ovens at 7 last night and opened their doors at 6 this morning, 3 hours earlier than usual. The bakery also tripled its workers, bringing in 20 more sets of hands.
I just love it. I can't get over the customers, how wonderful they are.
What is bringing you joy today?
Being with friends and family and filling the bellies of the customers.
And there sure were a lot of bellies being filled. This phone was ringing off the hook as people packed inside. More than 300 people ordered in advance. One of the largest orders, 110 dozen. Punchki are a Polish tradition. They're eaten between the Thursday and Tuesday before the start of Lent, as many Polish people will give up sweet foods for the next 40 days.
And Black's Bakery isn't the only one that makes punchkis today. Steinmar's also makes a lot of them, but they're actually closed. There's a sign on the front door saying, "We're out of punchkis, sorry." Lots of people coming into this parking lot, turning right around and driving out. Some of them a little bit disappointed.
I had to go up to the door and it said they were sold out. So once a year thing, and it's something we look forward to.
A staff member at Steinmar's says they sold a lot and were out of stock by about 9 this morning. But this wasn't going to stop people from getting their punchki.
So I guess we'll just have to go to another bake shop.
No matter where you got your punchki from, whether it was one or a few dozen, people had nothing but smiles on their faces.
Happy Punchki Day.
And that's the CBC's Jennifer LaGrassa absolutely crushing that punchki. It looked delicious. But we turn now to something that's been taking a bit of a bite out of your bank account, and that's the expensive cost of groceries. Inflation saw a larger drop than expected this month, but the cost of food continues to go up. CBC's Anis Hadari has those details.
Bargain hunting at the supermarket is still tricky these days.
Yeah, like definitely cutting on back on you could say expensive, but everything's expensive now.
Definitely difficult. It's been, well, we've been trying to make it out here in the city in Toronto.
We're definitely eating less meat because it's usually the most expensive part of the purchase.
And meat isn't getting any cheaper. It's one of the reasons groceries are up more than 11%. Chicken, specifically, up 9% compared to the month before, the highest increase since 1986. Also seeing big increases, bakery products and vegetables. No slowdown for rising grocery prices means it can be hard to notice that inflation overall is dropping a bit. And Canadians who feel their dollars stretching will spend less. Economists say that will slow down the economy.
The Bank of Canada and us expects consumer spending to slow over the course of 2023 as consumers face these challenges, particularly coming from food prices. And so that is expected to contribute to slowing economic growth.
If economic growth does slow down, the Bank of Canada may be able to avoid higher interest rates in the coming months. Those increases were to try and clamp down even higher inflation.
With inflation at 8%, the Bank of Canada needed to cool the economy. Part of that cooling is going to come from consumers not being able to spend as much because their budgets are getting squeezed.
Not everything is getting that squeeze. Cellular services got cheaper last month. Passenger vehicles too. But gasoline, that was more expensive, except in Alberta, where energy prices dropped due to provincial rebates and tax cuts. Anis Hadari, CBC News, Calgary.
To Turkey now, where search teams are once again racing against the clock to save people trapped under rubble. A 6.4 magnitude earthquake shook the region yesterday. Turkish officials confirm at least 6 people have been killed with nearly 300 injured. This latest quake was recorded near the Syrian border in southern Turkey and was felt in Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. It leveled buildings that had been weakened 2 weeks ago by the high magnitude quakes. At that time, those killed more than 47,000 people in Turkey and Syria. And donations are piling up at the Windsor Mosque. These will be shipped out today to areas hardest hit by those earthquakes. So far, the Windsor Islamic Association has raised $300,000 to help, saying today that Windsor's generosity is being felt on the ground as the recovery efforts continue. It's not unheard of for an earthquake to rock parts of southwestern Ontario. None at the scale, though, of the ones we've seen in recent months. But new research highlights how the earthquakes in our own backyard are changing. Darius Madavi is CBC's science specialist focused on the area of the Great Lakes, and he joins us now for more on this. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, we've seen a few quakes around here over the last couple of years. Can you tell us a bit about what may have caused them?
Sure, yeah. So most quakes are caused just natural causes. So things like plate tectonics, the movement of the Earth's crust, or something called isostatic rebound. So during the last ice age, when the glaciers moved off of the Earth, they left big indentations, and now slowly those are popping back up. So those are two major causes of just natural earthquakes in Ontario. But some quakes are also caused by humans. So activities like mining or changing water levels in dam reservoirs really quickly, or even the creation or destruction of tall buildings. Really anything that involves changing the stress on faults under or nearby can cause an earthquake.
And you mentioned artificially changing water levels can drive quakes as well. What about natural fluctuations, though? We've been seeing record highs and shifts here. Could that have an impact?
Possibly, yeah. So researchers are looking into this right now. It's quite a new area of research. But we've seen it in other places on Earth, so especially in Eastern Africa, where they have very active fault systems. They see a lot of seismic activity there. We've seen that large lake systems there, when their water levels fluctuate, it corresponds with the seismic activity that happens in the area. So a recent paper explored the water levels in Lake Erie and looked at whether it was correlated with seismic activity in the area. There was no conclusive correlation that they were able to find, but the researchers suspect part of this could be due to a lack of data. There's only a handful of stations around Lake Erie and across Ontario, actually. So this lack of data is really hampering our efforts to detect earthquakes, find out what's driving them in the area. But fortunately, new technologies are evolving. So researchers are now adapting fiber optic cables, like the ones that we use for telecommunications. They're able to modify them with something called distributed acoustic sensing technology. And what this does is it allows us to detect really minor fluctuations in seismic activity, and we can detect stuff across the entirety of the lake. And yeah, just much more minor fluctuations. So it's a big leap forward in terms of detecting and monitoring earthquakes.
Mm-hmm. And so could this become a problem for all of the Great Lakes?
It's possible, yeah. We're unsure because we don't actually have a good map of the faults under the Great Lakes. We know of one under Lake Erie, and we know that there's some under Lake Ontario. But what's stopping us is these faults are several kilometers underground, so it's really hard for us to find out where they are. The only way we can typically do it is by looking at the data we collect from an earthquake. So when an earthquake occurs on a fault, we're able to take those vibrations, take that data, and map where it occurred on a fault, even if it's several kilometers underground. So hopefully with these new technologies, we'll be able to do that more, find out where more of these faults are. Even if we think they're under all the Great Lakes, it's hard to be certain. But fortunately, there's not really much reason to worry. Even if we do start to see more earthquakes as a result of these fluctuating water levels, we're not really expecting any danger to come from it. This will probably be minor quakes. They won't cause much damage. Any changes we see will be pretty minor. But it's just kind of incredible to think that these fluctuating water levels, driven by often climate change, can have an effect on something like earthquakes. You know, it just shows how interconnected the different processes on the planet are. So, yeah.
Okay, this is really interesting stuff. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Darius Madavi is the CBC's science specialist focused on the area of the Great Lakes. And the Ontario legislature is back in session. One of the top agenda items for the government, introducing a bill it says will transform healthcare by expanding the use of private clinics. Lorenda Redekop has details on what's being done and why the opposition is concerned.
This afternoon, the health minister first presented her bill on bringing in changes to the healthcare system, including moving hip and knee surgeries out of hospitals and into private clinics, some for profit.
There are patients who are waiting too long for services that can be done safely in community, and we want to give them that opportunity.
Under the bill, any surgical or diagnostic centers would have to integrate with hospitals and other healthcare settings. Doctors working at these clinics must also have hospital privileges, one way of trying to ensure they don't get poached from the public system. But there's no language specific to nurses, already in short supply.
Any suggestion that we take HHR, Health Human Resources, away from one sector to add to another? No, absolutely not.
The bill says clinics that apply will have to map out their staffing plan. The opposition isn't convinced.
There is nothing in this legislation that actually prevents the siphoning off of workers. You know, these guardrails that the Minister of Health just talked about, they do not exist.
The health minister promises strong oversight with inspections of clinics, though there's been no decision yet on how they'll be regulated or by whom.
But immediately, we have concerns about the lack of oversight. The fact that the minister stood here and said that this is to be determined, this is concerning to us.
Patients using private clinics will be able to go to the patient ombudsman with any problems. The Liberals' health critic, a former emergency room doctor, wanted to see more solutions to better fund home care, long-term care, and primary care.
Instead, we're not doing that. Instead, what we're doing is we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater and moving to a very significant and dramatic pivot towards moving procedures out of hospitals.
Earlier, the Premier responded to an NDP question, raising concerns about the cap on nurses' wages and ER closures.
We're fixing healthcare and you're blocking healthcare every step of the way.
He gave the example of pharmacists, able to treat more patients with common illnesses, and says last month, 40,000 people received assessments.
The opposition wants to have endless debates about our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker, but the people of Ontario just want to make sure they see action happening, and that's exactly what we're doing.
It's unclear how quickly the government could move this bill through the House, but with their majority, there's almost no question it will pass. Lorenda Redicomp, CBC News, Toronto.
Still to come here on CBC Windsor News at 6, Environment Canada just issued a freezing rain warning for Windsor Essex moments ago. We'll have all of your latest weather details right after the break. And Colette Kennedy joins us live now for a look at weather. Colette, a freezing rain warning just issued moments ago, so something is coming.
Yeah, we've got winter really biting back at us. And, you know, that fine line, and I'll get into this in just a moment because it helps to illustrate it with the visuals, but that fine line between where it becomes rain mixing with freezing rain, it's a really close call into southwestern Ontario. There will be an area, and I think it's going to be quite a wide area, that is going to see continuous hours of freezing rain or freezing rain mixing with ice pellets. So let me break it all down for you. Just a quick look at the daytime highs, rounded up that 4.6 to 5 degrees, but that was before the front went through and the very breezy conditions along that front. So now at 0, that's pretty crucial, that temperature being right at freezing, but it's also the profile and temperature of the air above the surface. So the freezing rain warning extends all the way over there towards the Niagara region. The winter storm watch now, that's off further east. And what's happening with this bit of flurry activity, or the bursts of wet flurries seeing on the radar, that's not associated with the storm coming. It's actually back here still getting its act together through the northern plains and into the Rockies. It's feeding into very cold air from the prairies. And then what's going to happen is it's going to pick up a good deal of moisture, so it won't be lacking in this, from the Gulf. And all of these ingredients will be coming together and coming to visit us. So as it moves in tomorrow morning, likely starting as some wet flurries, kind of mixing with ice pellets or freezing rain, and then rainfall likely will end up seeing 10, 15 millimeters through Windsor, but you could see this area all the way stretching across that's pink, right through the warning area, where that extended period of freezing rain could essentially really allow the ice to build up. And with that ice buildup, that's when we get into concerns of seeing power outages and some of the power lines coming down. So that's certainly something we'll be watching for Wednesday, through the night, Wednesday night, and then into Thursday morning. You can see kind of where the models really want to target that area here. It's more towards north of Windsor, but towards Sarnia, back towards London, and over towards the west end of Lake Ontario, but all along the northern shore of Lake Erie as well. Overnight temperatures tonight, we're going to be kind of nearly steady, might change by a degree or so, but that's likely about it. So taking you through Wednesday, again, this is going to kind of work its way in, but the morning I would expect the arrival up to maybe 1 degree. That will help us make this more of a rain event, but I think at least at times we're going to see some real icing in here, and it's going to be a little difficult for the mid part of this week, that's for sure, Jason.
Okay, a messy next couple of days potentially. Thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
Still to come, we hear from Russia's president about the ongoing war. That's coming up right after the break. The UN Human Rights Agency says more than 8,000 civilian deaths have been recorded in Ukraine since Russia invaded last February.
The overwhelming majority of civilian casualties were caused by explosive weapons with wide area effects, including artillery shells, cruise and ballistic missiles, and airstrikes, and most occurred in populated areas.
UN officials believe the number of civilians killed in the ongoing war may be thousands more than documented. They pointed to a lack of information or access to what happened in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, now under Russian control. Moscow continues to deny intentionally targeting civilians during what it calls a special military operation. In his address today to the nation, Vladimir Putin tried to portray Russia as the real victim as its forces keep up the fight in Ukraine. He also blamed the West for starting it. The U.S. president, who recently visited Kyiv before heading to Poland, says Putin chose this war and that only he can end it. Briar Stewart reports.
In Russia, there was wall-to-wall coverage of President Vladimir Putin's speech. It was even beamed down over the few pedestrians passing by this mall in Moscow. He spoke for nearly 2 hours to a crowd of the country's political elite and what appeared to be a few soldiers. Putin again said it was the West waging war, while referring to Russia's invasion only as a special military operation. I want to repeat, it was the West who started this war, he said, and we used and are using force to stop it. There was no talk of what's been happening on the battlefield. Instead, pronouncements about how Russia's economy is weathering, even thriving under the sanctions. Not all are as enthusiastic. There is no reason to believe in the economy, said this man. Where will all these successes come from? We have a lot of opportunities, even though in many places the doors are closed. In his speech, Putin announced that Russia was suspending its participation in New START, its last remaining nuclear treaty with the U.S. Russian officials later said they're still committed to observing the limits around nuclear warheads, and they could resume participating in the treaty again if the U.S. changed its policy. Hours later, when U.S. President Joe Biden spoke to a crowd of thousands in Warsaw, he took aim at Russia's president.
President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. He could end the war with a word.
Biden's speech and the setting presented a triumphant air, a tone much different than the speech in Moscow.
He does not have a clear strategic vision.
This political researcher says Putin's speech was unremarkable because there isn't much to brag about.
I think Putin himself understands that the West will never consent to these demands. So it's more like a demonstration of resolve, so we're not going to stop. One clear message in the speech is that the war is not going to stop.
A large part of Putin's speech focused on domestic initiatives like helping soldiers' families and making life more affordable. It can be seen as a deliberate effort to boost confidence in the president at a time when the war he started now enters its second year. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
A note here from the Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment in our region. They're going to be training in Windsor this month. You might see dozens of soldiers marching in different formations like these in the area. They'll have high visibility markers and a safety vehicle following them. The regiment says this is to make sure the reserves are in good condition. They'll be carrying their weapons during the march, but they say those weapons will not be loaded. And before we leave you tonight, we wanted to give you another reason to celebrate today. In Windsor, it's Punchki Day, of course, but over in Brazil, well, it's the start of Carnival. Streets of Rio de Janeiro are taken over by massive, elaborate floats and thousands of brilliantly lit costumes and samba dancers. The celebrations are back this year after being canceled and cut back in recent years by the pandemic. Now, the government of Brazil estimates 46 million people across the country will take part in those festivities. That's it for us here at CBC Windsor News at 6. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, for news at any time, head to our website, cbc.ca/Windsor. We're on social media as well. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Have a great night.